All right, everyone. As many of you know, Western civilization is in the midst of a giant ideological civil war known as the Great Meme Wars. This is one of the most popular and consequential grand strategy games of the past few years, so I want to give an overview and walk through each of the major factions you can play and give them an overall rating. Starting out, we have the MAGA movement. This is one of the more popular, well-known factions, and really their play style is managing the decline of a large empire. You start off the game with a lot of territory, a lot of influence, but you have to manage a lot of internal disputes that are threatening the stability of your empire. You do have Donald Trump, who's one of the most powerful faction leaders in the game, but he does lack a clear successor, and one of the core mechanics, if you're going to play the MAGA movement, is properly identifying a successor that won't have the whole movement fall apart. Some of their key strengths is they have, I believe, the best walls in the game with the most effective border enforcement, and so they're very good at repelling foreign invaders. They also have the ability to blockade enemy ports using tariffs because they're sort of at the center of global trade, so they have a lot of influence in that regard. The biggest problem for the MAGA movement is that because they have to prioritize the interest of a foreign nation for some reason that we'll never know and probably got deleted and probably killed itself, the MAGA movement is very susceptible to internal division due to prioritizing another country other than America, which it claims to be America first. So overall rating is a B- because it's a large empire, you have a lot of influence, but you have a pretty decent challenge at the start trying to prevent it from collapsing. Next up, we have the Woke Left. The Woke Left is the largest left-wing faction and the primary challenger to the MAGA movement. They also start off with a pretty large power base at the beginning of the game, and one of the core mechanics in the Great Meme Wars is for any large ideological faction is keeping it together, keeping it stable, keeping it unified. And the Woke Left, if you play with them, you're going to be doing kind of a similar thing. Their play style is they gain influence by advocating for people who face real oppression, because from an ideological point of view, you have the compassion instinct in people, and if your movement is centered around drawing attention to people who genuinely do need compassion, then your movement will spread and will grow in influence. The Woke Left have very strong cultural domination and production. They have good universities, good artists, good musicians that produce a lot of wokeness. Their faction leader is okay, the Shah, Hassan Piker. He has a lot of upfront charisma, but he's not really an effective leader, and one of the interesting challenges will be finding someone on the Woke Left who can actually unite the movement in an effective way. The overall rating here is a B. They're pretty good, and they suffer from the same issue that a lot of large ideological factions suffer from. Next, we have the Environmentalists. This is a really fun faction to play. They have the potential to snowball very early. They gain influence every time a severe weather event happens because everyone can look at it and go, oh my god, the climate is changing, things are getting worse, and then the environmentalists suddenly get a bunch of new followers. So it's a very durable path to victory for the environmentalists. They have a very strong economy with some great farming bonuses, and their activists are able to draw a lot of attention to the cause, but often they are a little cringe themselves and can be repelling of people at times. Their main weakness is their units lack a lot of mobility because other than their grass-fed cavalry, they don't have access to a lot of the mobile transports that emit CO2 that other factions have access to. So I'm going to give them a B- because they do struggle to move around the map, which is a problem, but they do have a consistent source of ideological power to draw from. And at the end of the day, it is generally good to conserve the environment. People are naturally wired to be sympathetic to that. So they stand to be able to gain influence if they can kind of, strip themselves of the more cringe aspect of their ideology. Next up, we have the LGBTQ Armada. This is a sub-faction of the Woke Left and is sort of known as the infamous vanguard of the Woke Left. They have a very aggressive play style. They like to shove their beliefs down the throats of everyone who isn't them. They're sort of known as the ideological colonizer. They like to plant their flag everywhere. They have very strong shock troops. The Two-Spirit is a powerful Native American warrior that does a lot of damage up front, very effective. At the beginning of the game, they start off at war with both the Christian nationalists and the Red Pill movement, but they are actually at peace with the broader MAGA movement because obviously a lot of leaders in the MAGA movement are themselves a member of the LGBTQ Armada. So overall, if we're going to rate them, I'm going to give them an A- because they have a pretty straightforward, aggressive play style. At the beginning of the game, they know, what to do, they know where to go. Their only real drawback is more in the late game when they experience low population growth in their major cities because obviously they can't reproduce. Okay, next we have the Transhumanists. So this is obviously the more techno-focused faction in the game. They have access to the largest tech tree, as well as research bonuses on everything. The way they gain influence is by convincing people that the human body is frail and weak, and by focusing on all the, vulnerabilities of humanity. They promise technological augmentation to the human experience, which, obviously does have legitimate applications, like with Neuralink and all that, helping people who are disabled. So that's how they're going to gain a lot of influence. On the other hand, there's something very off trying to play God and trying to achieve immortality. And the prospect of uploading your consciousness to a computer where time can be artificially slowed down and then you can be tortured at an ever increasing infinite rate, thereby creating hell in reality, is not a great prospect. And so, that's kind of a barrier for a lot of people with transhumanists. They're good at using AI to spread their memes, and they obviously have access to the cyborg units, which are pretty powerful and aggressive. Overall, we're going to give them a C+, just because they're fairly niche, they're fairly hard to play, and kind of anti-human at the end of the day. Next up, we have the Christian Nationalists. The Christian Nationalists are another right-wing faction, and they probably have the highest early game potential in terms of being a real successor to the MAGA movement and sort of taking up all of the MAGA movement's influence as it sort of declines. The Christian Nationalists have a very tried and true sort of traditional religious play style that is very much by the book, because as Western culture continues to decline, face degeneracy, encourage and facilitate more and more atomization and loneliness and isolation, the Christian Nationalists are there to offer an alternative, bringing people into the church, so on and so forth. And that positions them as a meme that has the potential for a lot of influence with people who are suffering from the negative effects of living in sort of a decadent society. They have very strong monks and warrior priests who are very aggressive in their preaching and can convert a lot of people over to their team. Overall, we're going to give them an A-. These are a very high potential faction. They have a lot of political and cultural infrastructure there to capitalize on the decline of the MAGA movement. But as with many of these ideologies, well, all of them really, they can go too extreme, they can become repulsive, they can become sort of degenerate themselves, and they really need to figure out how to get over the sectarian divisions between the Orthodox, the Protestants, the Catholics, because right now it is not looking clear how they're going to make it out of there. Okay, next we have the Libertarians. This is sort of the largest alternative faction to the MAGA movement or the woke left, and they're a very interesting faction to play as. They have the strongest economy in the game because they don't pay taxes on any of their gold mining, and they have access to child labor to increase their villager gathering rates. In the most recent patch, they got access to a new starting faction leader, Thomas Massie, who is pretty good, has pretty good commitment to principle, is very good at opposing both the woke left and the MAGA movement, but he suffers from a lot of name recognition. So if you're going to play Libertarians in the early game, you got to really use and abuse Thomas Massie and try and spread your influence through that vector. The biggest problem with the Libertarians, as always, is their own extremists. They suffer from a serious crisis of being overrun by what are effectively libertarian jihadis known as anarcho-capitalists, and they tend to repulse normal people and be very cringe and have very bad ideas that make them that limit their ability to gain influence in the broader population.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
The license to drive? I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.
Overall, the Libertarians will get a B- for having good potential, but a lot of freaks weighing their own movement down. Next, we have the infamous Groypers. This is a right-wing faction that is an insurgent movement. They have a very insurgent play style. They start off the game waging a guerrilla war against the MAGA movement, and they basically gain influence every time a MAGA leader, explicitly bows down and kisses the ring of Israel. The Groyper play style is focused on capitalizing off of sort of angry young men, the resent they feel. And they do this effectively with a lot of shock humor, a lot of provocative memes, provocative statements and ideas. And they have a very charismatic and influential faction leader in Nick Fuentes. Their main weakness is that they seem to be infiltrated by a lot of closeted gay men and sexual deviants, but their units do get bonus damage against all Jewish factions. So, you can decide if that trade-off is worth it. Overall, I'm going to give them an A-, actually, because they do stand to gain a lot of influence. All the conditions are set up at the beginning of the game for them to grow. The main problem is just during the late game, they don't really have any maturity or end goal that is not kind of totally ironic and memeified. So if you're going to play as the Groypers, you really need to focus and, strip some of the more insane shit from the movement, and then it'll gain more influence. Okay, next up we have the Radical Centrists. This is one of the most unique factions in my opinion. They're a very small but highly specialized and niche faction that makes use of extremely potent memetic weaponry, right? They have the League of Politics champion spotlights and other videos where they use relatively sophisticated video game analogies to offer somewhat poignant political commentary in a way that is really digestible for a lot of people. Their greatest strength, though, is their diplomatic skills. They, bar none, have the best diplomacy in the game. They have the ability to engage in productive ideological discussions with everyone from far-right Christian nationalists to resistance liberals to far-left radical Marxists and left-wing video essayists. So their playstyle is unique because they don't really engage in direct political action. They sort of operate a little bit behind the scenes and try to form temporary ideological coalitions, uniting people to push for more pro-social outcomes that every memetic faction would agree on, like increasing adoption of nuclear power, implementing ranked choice voting, or making schools cell phone free to prevent social media psychosis on adolescent minds. The biggest weakness of the Radical Centrist is their faction leader is kind of a tool. He's incredibly bad at communicating to autistic people because he's constantly making these vibes-based arguments, these appeals to intuition, and he employs irony and ironic detachment way too much to the point where he will often refer to himself in the third person and make criticism or commentary about himself as if performatively entering a different person altogether to sort of give the appearance of making valid criticism, even though he himself is the one doing the criticism. So on the one hand, it's like, I hear what you're saying, but on the other hand, I'm going to mock it anyway because I know I'm right. It's very confusing. It's probably not even correct. And really, as soon as the Radical Centrist, if you're going to play as the Radical Centrist, as soon as you can oust this absolute tool, you'll be better off. Overall, we give them an A- for all the reasons stated above. Very good diplomacy, very good memes, and a very good path forward, and nobody loves radical centrism more than me. Next up, we have the Red Pill movement. The Red Pill movement they have a similar playstyle to the Groypers, although they're a much larger faction, although a bit more diffuse. They also gain influence by appealing to resentful young men, mostly. They have a very strong online presence with bonus damage against females and all ideologies that are related to or allied with feminism. And like all right-wing factions, they start off at war with the woke left, and they are in a particularly brutal conflict with the LGBTQ armada. Overall, I'm going to give them a C-, primarily because their faction leaders are some of the worst in the game, to be honest. People have pointed out their kits, they're pretty strong in terms of the shock value and aggression and horizontal influence, but in terms of durability, it's just you can't preach against degeneracy and also be pushing degeneracy on the other hand. So they have kind of an uphill battle. If you can find a more stable, more normie appealing faction leader, then the Red Pill movement might have some ability to metamorphosize into something more productive and influential. Next, we have the Democratic Socialists. Democratic Socialists are the champions of class politics. The current meta in the Great Meme Wars is one that tends to reward people who focus on class politics more because a lot of the problems we face are lack of home ownership, techno-feudalism, extreme wealth inequality. Being able to go into debt to buy a burrito is not really anything that's pro-human or productive for society. So the ideologies that can incorporate these critiques and offer solutions, like the Democratic Socialists can very well, are going to have a pretty solid advantage. Their faction leader, Bernie Sanders, is pretty good. In my opinion, he's a little overrated. Everybody seems to love Bernie, and I get why. But personally, I think his kit is just not as overpowered as people make it out to be. And, he's good. He's a solid starting point, but you really need people who are more focused on class and can definitely resist the propensity to kind of devolve into identity politics and all the stuff that is really a risk to left-wing factions. At the start of the game, you are allied with the woke left, and your biggest challenge is going to try to avoid getting annexed by them, because if you do, you're going to lose a lot of the class-based advantages that really give you a leg up. So if you can manage that at the beginning of the game and kind of draw a clear distinction, then you're going to have a good path forward. Overall, we'll give them a B+. They are a solid faction. They're vulnerable to some of the classic identity politics, woke mind virus type stuff, but they offer very good solutions and have some serious potential. And then lastly, we have the Black Pill Doomers, who are led by none other than Satan himself. These people are really cringe and pathetic and anti-human and lack optimism. And the ideology spreads and is appealing because it capitalizes off the fact that you don't have to do anything, you don't have to have any principles, no beliefs. You can abdicate all responsibility and just lie on the couch and cover yourself in Cheeto dust. And so you're gonna have a large amount of like numbers behind this, but the quality of the individuals, the quality of the units are not very great. And so if you're gonna play as the Black Pill Doomers, really your only hope is that the entire world collapses so that you can say, I told you so, and then that's really the only advantage of doing this. Overall, we're gonna give them a D- because they don't really have any principles, and at least every other faction is willing to stand up for something and be pro-human in principle, except for the transhumanists maybe. But this is a admittedly dangerous faction to all other factions, and if you're playing as someone else, you're gonna have to deal with them at some point. All right, everyone, thank you for watching, and FYI, the soft rollout of the PF Young Patreon has already begun. Aside from posting videos that would be exclusive to patrons, I still want to figure out all the things I could do with a Patreon community. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, if you're interested in getting in on the ground floor, potentially helping shape what the Patreon would look like and maybe getting involved beyond just being a supporter, you can join the Patreon now. The link will be in the pinned comment and the description. Until next time, good luck and Godspeed.